Well, sorry. Am I on? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Programme and Resources Committee on Friday, the 20th of January. If we could start the meeting, please. We've got quite a busy agenda. Can we start with a roll? Can I just remind you, first of all, we are being recorded. So please turn your phones off and your microphones off unless you're speaking. If we could start with a roll call of members, please, from Democratic Services.
Thank you. If you just, if you're here, say present and declare any interest. Thank you. Professor Janet Haddock-Fraser.
Present and no declarations.
Mr Beresford.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Farrell.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Greaves.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Gregory.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Heath. Councillor McCloy.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor McLaren.
Present, no declaration.
Miss Slack.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Tapping.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Taylor.
Present, no declarations.
Miss Witter.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have apologies for absence from Councillor Becky Woods, Mr Zahid Hamid and Councillor Chris Furness. If we could move to item 2, please, which is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 15th of July 2022 as an accurate record. Could I have a mover for this, please?
Yeah, I'll move them.
Thanks, Charles. And seconder, Andrew McCloy. Thank you very much. So those are approved. Item 3, urgent business. There is apparently no urgent business, so we can move to item 4, public participation. And for this meeting, we don't have any public participation noted. So if we could move to item 5, it's going quickly so far, isn't it? The first item for decision, which is VAT partial exemption and up to tax authority land and property. Justine Wells from Finance will be briefly introducing this item, and then we'll open it for questions.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So I'm asking this morning for members to approve exercising the option, the authority's option to tax some of our land and buildings. This is to prevent the authority from having to pay VAT on exempt activities of the authority. So as a VAT registered body, the authority has some activities for which under VAT it is naturally exempt from VAT. And most of that relates to this authority comes from income from land and property. However, land and property for residential use is always exempt of VAT, even if an option to tax is in place. Now, the reasons for wanting to exercise these options to tax are related to the reclamation of VAT on expenditure, which relates to exempt activity. So under VAT rules, anybody that's registered for VAT can reclaim the VAT on expenditure incurred for an exempt activity. But that's only if the amount is below a de minimis level, and HMRC set that de minimis as 5% of the total VAT that a body reclaims on their expenditure as a whole. So essentially making sure that the amount that is reclaimed is very small and not really on their radar. So the VAT that the authority regularly reclaims on our revenue costs from these exempt activities is around 3% of our total VAT, so that's quite small. But the impact is felt when the authority needs to make capital investments into exempt property. Obviously, if you're doing capital works on land and property, that can usually be quite costly. In 1920, the authority did breach the 5% threshold and had to pay almost £60,000 in VAT. So it's not a small sum to the authority. And also, if that threshold is breached, then it is all the VAT that has been reclaimed in the financial year on exempt activity that must be repaid, not just one or two particular items. So it's quite punitive, really, from that respect. So as I mentioned in the report, if we opt to tax a property with higher expenditure, and this will reduce that pressure on the calculation that we have to do every year. And it will also give more scope for those activities for which we either cannot opt to tax, like residential, or that we choose not to because of the impact to our customers and tenants. However, there are 3 disadvantages to exercising the option to tax. Firstly, our customers will receive a charge of 20% VAT. So any of our tenants who currently pay rent to any of our properties that we then opt to tax will now have to pay VAT on that. But working with asset management and our legal teams, most of our customers are VAT registered, so the impact would be minimal. And they should be able to reclaim that additional charge. We also only invoice quarterly, usually, again. So those smaller businesses who can only reclaim their VAT quarterly, we shouldn't have too much of an impact on their cash flow. The other disadvantage is when the opt to tax is put in place, it generally lasts for 20 years, and there have to be a really set of specific circumstances for that option to tax to be removed from that land or property. And then finally, if a property is disposed of, then VAT must be charged on the sale price, while ever that option to tax is in place. So the appendix on the report I've indicated a priority order for considering which areas to opt to tax, and I propose to continue to work with asset management and legal teams to ensure that the properties are only opted where they have those higher expenditure costs and minimal impact to customers. The overall principle is to make sure that we can keep investing in those properties that we really need to invest in without having to incur a 20% additional cost to our improvements. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, Justine. There are 2 recommendations on this paper. The first is to approve opting to tax properties owned by the authority on a property-by-property basis, and the second is to delegate the decision of which properties to opt to tax on this basis to the Head of Finance. So I'd like to open it now to members for questions and comments, please. I've got Andrew McCloy, then Yvonne, then Pete Tapping, then Andrew Gregory.
Chair, thank you. Insofar as I understand this at all, can I just check, I've got this right, Justine, that there may be some tenanted properties that we control, we own, that where they're not VAT registered and they're potentially, they will be clobbered by an extra 20%? Is that what I understand?
Yes, there are.
Do we have any idea how many, and are we doing anything to alert them to this or support them?
I think, and I might ask to Matt to help me on this because he has a bit more information than I do. First, a lot of our customers are, so our tenants here, for example, a lot of them are VAT registered. And we did discuss that, for example, if we opt to tax Holden House, then we have to charge every tenant, and whether any of that could be absorbed by the authority. That was one option. But I think what Matt and I need to do is actually look at that properly. But because at the moment, I don't think that's actually very many customers.
I guess the reason I'm asking this is we're all sensitive with the cost of living pressures, and reputationally, if we're seen to be coming down on some tenants disproportionately, it might not look good. That's all.
Yeah. And Andrea, do you want to...
Just so that you know, what we've done is that we put in all the leases the fact that we would have the opportunity to opt to tax, and so when tenants signed up, they were aware that that was a possibility. So that was flagged up, and also in relation to tendering of our concessions as well. It was part of the tender specification that this was a possibility. So we have been making tenants and our customers aware that this was a possibility. And in relation to that, I think my understanding is that the majority of our tenants are all VAT exempt.
Yes. I think in terms of here, for instance, there's one of our tenants who has a very small room, single-person room, who isn't VAT registered, all the rest are. So, I guess worst-case scenario for us to absorb that would be a few £100 a year. It's nothing significant for that one, but you know, like we say, it is in the lease anyway. If you sign, then we do have the option to add that to that. In terms of the Warslow properties, most of we're not sure about some, but we know most of them are VAT registered anyway. And actually, you know, if you look at the appendix, you know, they're further down the list in terms of our priorities. So the ones we focus on first, you know, Millersdale, Castleton, Alton House, you know, the top half of those at least are all, you know, VAT registered.
Chair, thanks to Matt for that. I guess I was more anxious about maybe the smaller tenanted properties on places like Warslow, with all the other pressures, cost of living pressures at the moment. There's a potential for this to add to the burden, and for us to look as uncaring landlords.
Can I just add to that as well? Those, particularly on Warslow, those properties which have a residential element, there will never be any VAT on the residential element. If we opt to tax those sites where it has a mixed use, we would have to do a proper apportionment of which of the land is for commercial, and it would only be that element that would be VATable.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yvonne Witter, please.
I have two questions. I think Andrew has asked part of it, so I've got to answer to that. So about tenants and VAT register. I just wanted to ask about the 120,000 reserve.
Sorry, Yvonne, could you put your microphone on?
Sorry. So the question I've got to ask is about the reserve for the 120,000. The repayment of the 59,000, was that from the 120,000? And what have you got in reserve now?
No, I created the reserve at outturn in the last 2 years because of that bill. So we had to pay around £60,000. So we have approximately 2 years' worth if we needed it.
Right, okay, thanks.
But this is sort of mitigation so that we don't need it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. Pete Tapping, please.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks, Justine. Whilst I was trying to find out what this all meant, I came across some stuff on the gov.uk site which said that exempt reclaims is limited to £625 per month.
A local authority is a Section 33 body under VAT legislation, which basically means that we have a 5% de minimis rather than that flat amount.
Fine, yeah. I couldn't make my way through the government site to find that out. And you're saying, right, on page 10, paragraph 12, it says that you can't exempt things. Where are we? Oh, yeah. Land is not a capital item over £250,000 spent within the previous 10 years. Now, from where I sit, I'm assuming that maybe we spent more than £250,000 on Castleton Village Visitor Centre and Millersdale, and that would mean that they can't be included in this.
That's only if we wanted to deregister it as a opted area.
Right.
So if we opted to tax Millersdale, for example,
Right.
if we then spent money in that period, we
So
couldn't deregister it.
It's not historic. It's not up until now.
No,
it's
once the option is in place.
Paragraph 7 says there was a 5% buffer when we were at the VAT arrangement with DCC. Does that mean coming out of the VAT arrangement with DCC was a bad idea?
We didn't have a choice.
Oh, right, okay. Right, okay, yeah, fine. And in paragraph 12 again, it says, right, the second bullet, point 4, the exempt supplies have been incidental to the main use of the land and building. What does incidental mean?
I did check this out with finance officer in my team. It's, for example, if you have a poster or a hoarding or something on your land, so that's
Right.
that you've paid that someone's paid a nominal charge for.
So if it's only incidental stuff and not stuff that is dental, whatever that means, then is it worth doing?
Again, it's only if you want to revoke it.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Yeah. Sure. And I assume that this would mean that the rental that comes up somewhere else about Millersdale would increase by 20% as well.
Yes, but that would be then handed over to HMRC.
And they can reclaim it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And there was something you said was about VAT. If we sell it, is that on? Does that come on the capital amount at the end of it, on the sale? Because we've only reclaimed VAT on what we've spent on revenue rather than on capital.
It's the sale price. You end up charging VAT on the sale price, essentially.
Yeah. Opt in, and that suddenly becomes VATable in all circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Great. Thank
Okay.
you. Cheers.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Any other? You finished, Justine?
I think it's just that's why it's really considered, and we want to do it on a property by property basis and make sure that we're only doing it where it's really we really have to, or it has minimal impact on the customer.
Okay, thank you. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Janet. It's conversations like this remind me why I'm so glad I didn't train as an accountant. VAT is such an incredibly complicated subject. My main question was actually Andrew's, which was about the point which he's picked up, because the VAT threshold I think is still 85,000, isn't it? Yeah. So I was just thinking, how many businesses could this impact? But you answered the point. Okay. I suppose my only point was, and when I was musing over this, reading the paper, I just thought, why have we decided to do it now rather than, because obviously the opportunity to decide to opt to charge the VAT has been around for a long time, hasn't it? So what's changed, I suppose, was my kind of reaction to when I read the paper.
Well, my predecessor started this ball rolling back in March 2020, and COVID hit, so it got paused, and it's just felt it's one of the things that I've kind of got to next. It has been on my radar since I've been here.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I've got Charles and then James Beresford. Charles.
Yeah, thanks, Justine. So you've clarified that this, rather than it being across the board, you're going to use this delegation on a tactical basis, figure out which ones offer the most advantage with the least impact. So I think from what I've heard, the only one that might be an issue really is the non-VAT tenant at Alden House. I think what I'd be keen to understand is if you have the delegation go through, what's the process for reporting back upon what's happened, what the impact's been, how it's been taken, that kind of thing. Because I appreciate legally there's no issue in doing it, but there is that aspect about the reputational damage that may arise. So what's the process for reporting back to us?
I've been thinking about that, thanks Charles, and I think it probably would be opportune to include something in the outturn report. I was thinking whether to include it in budgeting or outturn, but I think outturn is probably the better place to include a brief paragraph in there.
Okay, thank you. And James.
Thank you, Chair. In making this decision, are we future-proofing ourselves in respect to VAT? Or will we have to come back to this?
I'm hoping we're future-proofing ourselves and that we won't have to come back to it. I think we were newly registered as a VAT body in 2019, so it's kind of working through that, the impact of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pete.
Sorry, can I just come back? Just occurred to me, if we do decide to VAT register properly, presumably we'd have discussions with the tenants first in order to make sure that they know how to and can reclaim all the VAT.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I was asking for delegation to do this on a property by property basis to allow those kind of discussions to happen, working with Matt and his team.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask for someone to move the recommendation? Charles, thank you. Seconder, Andrew McCloy. Can we have a show of hands for people who agree with this recommendation? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who was struggling to understand VAT, so thank you for that. And thank you for explaining it as clearly as it's possible to explain, Justine. Thank you.
I didn't want to go into too much detail.
No. I remember my geography teacher at school used to talk about VAT, but she used to talk about FIS VAT and VAT. It was very confusing. Right, if we go to item 6 now, which is the award of the Millersdale Station Catering and Visitor Information Point lease. And Matt Freestone is presenting this. We also have Catherine Johnson at the back. Catherine, welcome. I think you're the one who's been working on this, and you're here to see us in action today. So, Matt, over to you.
Thank you. Well, hopefully this is a bit more straightforward and a bit less taxing
Oh, don't say
than the last item.
Taxing, very funny.
So yeah, we're basically seeking an authority to enter into a new lease for the cafe at Millersdale. The value of the lease is just over £40,000 per annum for a 3-year period. So it takes us over the 100,000 threshold where we need authority approval, well, P&R approval. So the lease is essentially for the operation of the cafe, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And it also throws in, some additional responsibilities in terms of providing a visitor information point, which is a way we've been trialling at that site to kind of help visitors with information. Also cleaning of the public toilets, opening and kind of very basic day-to-day management of the goods shed as well is in there this time. We've made also a couple of changes in the lease since the last time. We've given more maintenance responsibility to the tenant, so they're now responsible for all internal maintenance of the cafe building, and responsible for all the kitchen equipment that we provided when we fitted out the kitchen. Just to be clear, the extent of the lease is just for the actual cafe itself. It doesn't include the goods shed or any external areas, although they do have access to the seating outside. And like I say, we include in the lease the responsibility for opening up the goods shed while the cafe is open. So we're proposing to award the lease to Blueberry Foods, who have run the site for the last 4 years actually. And they also run our cafe up at Castleton. So we're satisfied they're offering good value and do a good job of running the site. So our recommendation is that we are granted authority to enter into the lease. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Members, questions and comments, please. I'll go to Lydia first and then Pete.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering how many people applied for the tender. And then following on from that is just the break clause. Are we confident that if they break, we can find someone to come in within 4 months? Just given the current economic climate, I just thought we need to protect ourselves there.
In terms of the response to the tender, we did have quite a lot of interest in the tender. We'd rather not make the number of actual responses public at this stage. And in terms of the break clause, I think 4 months would be reasonably challenging to get it turned around in that time. But we have the tender pack that we've used this time ready to go. It would be achievable, I think, if we had to. But I think that hopefully is unlikely anyway.
Thank you, Lydia. Pete Tapping.
Thanks, Chair. Last time I was up at Millersdale, it was a good crack, and the food's good and the coffee's good. The only issue you had is the recyclability of the rubbish, the leftovers. I think when we went up there for on one of our away days, and we had difficulty finding somewhere to put the recyclable cups because all there was a black bin, which was actually full as well. And it was a bin bag, so we thought maybe that just gets chucked in the skip rather than sorted out. So I wondered if we can put something in probably in paragraph 10 about climate change, about ensuring that the tenants actually do recycle all their all the throwaway stuff that they give out. And I know they use wooden spoons and all the rest of it, but it does seem that the recycling and the rubbish collection facilities, when I've been up there, I wanted to go out there this week, but the weather's put that to the kibosh on that. But I think I'd like to see them paying more attention to that, because that's what they weren't doing when we were there last. Everything else was fine.
Yes, I mean, we have a kind of attached to the lease a number of key performance indicators, and that does include recycling, for instance, and a number of other environmental performance indicators in there. One of the things that's come about from the engagement business change process, and a business case that will be coming to RMM fairly soon, is kind of properly resourcing the management of these leases. Previously, it sat with engagement, who have struggled to resource that. As Janet said, Catherine has recently stepped in and started running that. So, we're hoping to, through Catherine, to have a proper resource to actually monitor these KPIs for this lease and all our concession holders, more effectively in the future.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Charles Greaves.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a side issue. I've been to Millersdale a couple of times. One occasion I went, it was heaving, and the cafe was doing roaring business, but the parking machines weren't working properly. So there were lots of us trying to pay for parking, unable to do so. And I guess the authority have missed out on quite a lot of money that day. And we were all going into the cafe to say, the machine's not working, how do we pay for parking? And it might have been a bank holiday or a weekend, but it was a case of, just put a note to say you've tried. And I just thought it might be something in terms of helping to manage the site better. And I'm quite comfortable with the list as it's been agreed, if you like, but it's more of those working arrangements to have that conversation with the operator. They know the site really well. If there's problems with it, how to flag it up, is the workarounds, is it a case of asking if there's a problem with the machine? And I don't know how frequent an issue it is, whether or not that was just a bit of a blip, or whether the machine goes down on a regular basis, as to whether or not they might be able to help with something like that, have a workaround and sell tickets, that kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, that's noted. I mean, we have had some problems with the parking machine up there, and I think we've tracked it down to the reliability of the broadband connection, particularly for card payments. And IT have switched us over onto a different system now, so hopefully that should be improved anyway. But yes, I mean, we do have a close relationship with Blueberry anyway, and they do have numbers for out of hours contacts and that type of communication with us anyway. But yeah, it's certainly something we could have a chat with them about, see what they think they could do as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. James Beresford.
Thank you, Chair. Charles set me off down a bit of a rabbit warren here, or rabbit hole here, but those who visit the cafe won't know that it's tendered out, and they will inevitably see the staff as being Peak Park staff. And I just wonder if, given which Charles said about the car parking, whether we encourage them to communicate with customers in a way in which our visitor centre staff would, in terms of where to see, where to go, etc., etc. Because that's all part. An information point's fine if you want to pick up a leaflet, but if I was a visitor and I might say to them, well, how long is it to walk to X or Y? And if they go, don't know, it doesn't reflect on as well. And I'm not saying they're like that, but if in your communications about car parking, Matt, it might be an idea just to encourage them to think more broadly as to the ambassadorial role they might have on behalf of the Peak Park?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And again, I think the visitor information point and the whole kind of visitor offer, you know, from our perspective down there, is something I'm hoping with more resources we can kind of, you know, work with them a bit more on.
Okay, thank you, James. I think we've no more questions. Will someone move this recommendation? Pete Tapping. Charles, will you second it, please? Can we have a show of hands for people who approve this recommendation? That's unanimous, thank you. And I think it's excellent that Blueberry want to continue with us at Millersdale Station, and that they have a business that's flourishing that makes them want to do so. So it's a good news story for us. If we could move to item 7 now, which is for decision for review of the occupational safety and health policy. And we're welcoming John Waite, who's been an annual visitor to us, at least at this committee. So welcome, John. If you'd like to give us a brief introduction to the paper, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is, many of you will be familiar now, the occupational safety and health policy for the authority, which comes to this committee annually. It's reviewed before that by myself and the management team, goes to our health and safety committee for any comments there, and then comes to this committee. It's best practice for governance for it to be reviewed regularly, and so it meets that obligation and gives the opportunity to refresh familiarity with that policy for all of you. So the policy is in fact not changed at all from 2022. I remind you that it was substantially reviewed and changed, the format, the appearance of it back in 2018. So it's been around in this similar format for some years now, but it does the job it's designed to do. It describes the obligations and the intention of the authority to have excellent, ultimately excellent standards of safety and health management at work. It does need to be changed whenever there's any significant organisational changes to the roles and titles of colleagues here, so that the responsibilities can be accurately awarded and then held to account. And so it is perfectly possible, likely perhaps, that during this year, if there's further organisational structural change, we'll need to revisit the policy and make sure it's accurate, up to date, and reflects, you know, the jobs that we'll need to do to keep people healthy and safe. Apart from that, I don't think I need to go through the policy in any detail. The recommendation here is that you approve the policy in the format you've been given today, as of today, to be the occupational safety and health policy for 2023.
Thank you. Andrew McCloy, then Andrew Gregory.
Only to move approval, and as I say almost every time, really good to see us working across the National Park family with this kind of good practice. A side question, really trivial one, this, John. Why is it occupational safety and health and not health and safety? Because after all, our committee is the Health and Safety Committee.
It's a bit semantic, isn't it? But yes, it tends to be the sort of more modern term for occupational safety and health. The professional body I belong to is the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, and I'm a chartered member of IOSH, so it follows that pattern. It's a title used in other parts of the world, in America, Australia, it's occupational safety and health as opposed to health and safety. And I suppose P&R purposes, health and safety has often had a bad sort of image, a bad rap, particularly in certain parts of the media in this country. So perhaps it's a move away from that. But yeah.
So it wasn't an expensive rebranding exercise. Andrew Gregory.
John, I wanted to just ask a bit of a practical question arising out of the fire alarm test we had in December. When I remember that, you know, we were all to check in with that, and you had your board checking on numbers, and I recall there seemed to be a bit of disparity between the checking in and actually your list. And I just wondered, I know it's a point of detail, but I just wondered whether that experience had made you just think about your report and whether there's anything else practically that we need as a takeaway from that. Because it was for members, it was a real life in action experience of kind of the health and safety policy working.
Thank you. Yes, yes. As you recall, we had that drill last time, and there were some glitches with it. The purpose of having drills, of course, is to remind people of, give you the opportunity to hear the alarm, practice the procedure that we have to follow. And I would say that whenever we've done a drill or whenever we've had a false alarm, that's been followed by everybody here at Alden House Well, as it was, on the occasion you were here last. We did have a glitch with that. We've been using the roll call system that is generated by the use of our access cards. When we use the card to access the building and to move around within the building, that's our presence here is logged by the system. And we use then a roll call which is generated on a mobile phone or on a tablet out in the assembly point to account for people. It turned out on the day that the entry point, the main reception doors here, although when you used your card it opened the door and allowed you in, it didn't log you into the system. So if people came in through the front door, came in here, as many of you will have done today, you weren't logged into the system on that day. If you'd then gone elsewhere in the building, it would have recognised you were here. So it recognised some of us were here, but many of us not. That was a problem with that sensor on the door. I spoke to Matt afterwards, and it was quickly solved within the software of the system, and we tested it and made sure it was working then. The purpose of doing drills is, of course, part of the purpose is to find any problems with the system. So we've improved that. We've also since then agreed that our colleagues in CBST will also be able to generate roll calls. So they'll have a tablet in their office. Generally, there's always some staff in that department here. So they will also, in the absence of any colleagues in property and a few others like myself, they'll also have the ability to generate a roll call to find out exactly who was here in the event of an evacuation. That answers your questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Charles, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the policy hasn't changed from last year, and it's contained as Appendix 2. What's the plan for sharing it beyond P&R? Because there's half the members are here, half aren't. So how will the other members be aware of what the policy is, or rather the key themes of what the policy is?
Yeah, the design of the governance system is that it comes to this committee as the committee delegated to receive it on behalf of the authority. If there's a need then to remind other members who aren't part of this committee about the policy, then that can be done independently. I'll do that as a briefing following today via Ruth, just to ask that all members can be reminded of the policy and the key points. To refer to it now, perhaps it's on page 30 in your pack. So it's in part 2 of the policy. There is a paragraph there specifically about the authority members, and we'll reiterate that to the whole of the authority. I also mentioned this morning earlier on that there is now a briefing, an update briefing for members specifically that I was asked to design, and I'm delivering to a number of other parks, South Downs and Northumberland, which is an update on occupational safety and health, legal obligations, legal liabilities for members. It's something we've done before, I think, in a written format sort of update, but this is designed as either a face-to-face delivery or a remote delivery, sort of 2-hour course. So I'll be talking again to Ruth to publicise that with the authority.
Yeah, thank you, John. Andrea, do you want to add to that?
Yes, it's a really good point, and it's part of, as the Chair said, the scheme of delegation has delegated a responsibility to programmes and resources, but for something so important, we do need to make sure there's that visibility throughout the authority and the membership. So what we propose to do is to send a briefing note out to all members following the recommendation of acceptance of the policy today by yourselves. And also as well, John mentioned the learning and development module that's been developed specifically for members, and I'm going to ask Ruth to look into that as part of our essential training for members and see whether the best way of rolling that out to ensure that all members have the opportunity to go through that training module. And also we'll be looking at updating, as we always do, our induction pack to ensure that there's links into that. So I think it's a very good question. We need to make sure that anything that comes here that impacts on all of the authority members, which obviously this policy does, is brought to their attention. So in short, a briefing note, we're going to look at rolling out the learning and development module and making sure that it forms part of our ongoing induction. But as Andrew knows, we review the induction for new members on a regular basis, and this is a big year for us, that potentially we could have up to 17 new members joining us. But with something as important as occupational safety and health, the reason it comes here on an annual basis is to ensure that recognition, and we need to get that elevated up, so we'll ensure that that's done following this meeting.
Thank you, Andrea. We don't need to add to this recommendation at this point, but hopefully those will be put into action. I would ask that those of us who were inducted 4 years ago don't necessarily remember what we were inducted about 4 years ago, so it is worthwhile making sure that existing members are kept up to date and reminded of important issues such as safety and health. We've had a mover for this recommendation from Andrew McCloy. Do I have a seconder? Andrew Gregory, please. All in favour? Again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And John, thank you ever so much for the work you do for us and on behalf of all the national parks in this regard. Thank you. Okay, we're now moving on to item 8, which is for discussion. And as you're aware, Programmes and Resources Committee has two components to it. One is the resources element, which are the sort of items we've been dealing with to date. We're now going to look at one of the 4 programmes that Programmes and Resources are responsible for. And as you may remember, at I think it was Authority last July, we agreed that Programmes and Resources Committee would be structured in terms of its programmes, aligning it to the 4 aims of the management plan that will come live in this year, in April this year. And those 4 aims were climate change, nature recovery, access and sustainable communities. The meeting today, we are receiving and discussing the first item, which is the climate change aim. Now, Emily Fox should be presenting this, and sadly she's unwell and unable to attend the meeting today. So I think Phil and Andrea have had a robust discussion about which of those will present it, and Phil said that Andrea can do it. So Andrea's going to present it, and she's hoping that as in the group we have some long-standing members of the Climate Change Steering Group, as well as former members, as well as new members, as well as people with interest, that they will also contribute to answering any questions that members have after the introduction. So Andrea, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Haddock-Fraser. That was my introduction, actually.
Oh, sorry.
So very important, the programme element of programmes and resources, and this is the first theme that you will be seeing. So obviously, what I wanted to do was to just draw out, really, how we were going to move forward with climate change and actually the path that it's been on over the last couple of years, which in the main has been pushed forward by the member Climate Change Steering Group, which was developed back in 2019. And as a result of the work that that group has taken on, it really has embedded climate change in everything that we do, so much so that it's front and centre in the recently approved National Park Management Plan, and it's the first aim that the Peak District National Park is going to be, the vision includes it as well, that we're going to be more resilient and net zero by 2040 through our exemplary response to climate change. So in relation to this, I wanted to just highlight where that golden thread has come through the National Park Management Plan. And not only is it the first aim that we come to, but we have 3 objectives flowing from that, which we're working with our partners to do to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And by 2028, there's going to be a 25% reduction in our total greenhouse emissions in the park over those areas where we're the greatest influencer. And that really is around land management, energy for premises and road travel. We then move into objective 2, which is to sequester and store substantially more carbon while contributing to nature recovery. And by 2028, there will be 2,878 tonnes net decrease in our carbon emissions from our moorlands. And then the third objective that we're working towards with partners is to reverse the damage to nature, biodiversity, cultural heritage, and particularly the built environment caused by the changing climate. And by 2028, we're looking to secure the funding for 4 measures that increase the resilience of our existing habitats and species, cultural heritage, and the built environment. So there's a lot there that we're doing with partners, and that flows through to our authority plan that was also approved as well back in December, which is to achieve a further 30% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions from our 2017-18 baseline. And that's going to be very much by implementing and keeping up to date our carbon management plan, which we're going to hear a lot more about in the next report from Matt, where he's going to give us a progress report in relation to that. So I think you can see that climate change has been embedded in what we do as an authority moving forward, and that has been as a result of the work that the Climate Change Steering Group has done. And I really wanted to be able to celebrate the successes of the group moving forward. So not only do we see the vision in the National Park Management Plan reflecting our ambition, it's in the authority plan, as I mentioned. Training, we mentioned that earlier in relation to occupational safety and health. We now have run our first essential training on climate change for members, which was well received, and it's something that we will continue as an authority. Obviously, implementing carbon management too, you as a committee have been instrumental in approving carbon management too and moving that forward, and as well working on a consistent carbon baseline for national parks. And this goes back to what Andrew was saying earlier, that this is work that's been done with consultants across the whole national park family that we've been very much leading on, and we have helped other national park members of the family to join in with that, so that we can get a consistency between the 10 national parks moving forward, so that this headline data can be used to identify those 3, and it was used to identify the 3 biggest emitters that I mentioned earlier around land management, energy for premises, and road travel. So along with that, the working group has fed into the work on the climate change vulnerability assessment, which is a key evidence base for the authority, and it's now being used by members, partners and stakeholders to inform their own land management strategy. So where they're actually working in collaboration with our partners to move the agenda forward and helping them gather that evidence base for the wider place. Also as well, the steering group was given the remit of steering our sustainable transport project, and that's being moved forward. And now that Phil's with us, Transport Symposium is going to be held in the near future to actually steer that work and move it forward. So I think you can see that the actual work that the Climate Change Group has achieved in such a small amount of time has been something really very much to celebrate. In that vein, the second recommendation that's before you today is that as climate change has now been fully embedded with the authority, and the National Park Management Plan is central to all the work that we are doing, then with discussion with the chair and the group, one of the recommendations to authority is that we no longer need to appoint members to a climate change working group, and that recommendation is the second one in front of you. I understand that the group will meet up until the 31st of March during the current corporate strategy, but then it won't be meeting afterwards because we have actually got performance. I've forgotten the word. So
performance indicators, KPIs.
Yeah, well, we've got performance indicators, and we've also got steps in place for members to be able to continue to monitor as we move forward the National Park Management Plan and our authority plan moving forward. So that's the second recommendation that's in front of you today, not to appoint the Climate Change Working Group. So I'm sure that Emily would have done this a lot more competently, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the climate change theme, where we've come from, the ambition moving forward, and the key role that's been played by the Climate Change Working Group. I know a number of members are around the table today, and the chair is with us, and it's really an opportunity to celebrate where we've come from, but also to acknowledge that there is a long way to go. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well covered, Andrea. As I said, it's a shame that Emily's not here today because she was instrumental in bringing a lot of this together, as were many of the other officers and a lot of members of the Climate Change Steering Group. And a lot's been achieved, but a lot of time was spent doing that in a very cooperative and constructive way. So before we open it up to comments, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been involved, officers and members, and it is a shame Emily's not here to have presented it. Before I open it up to wider comments, I'm going to spring a question on the chair of our authority, who's chair of National Parks England, just to provide some sorry, Andrew, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, to provide some context for us on how what we're doing here aligns with what the other national parks are doing in regard to climate change and their management plans, just briefly. Are we in line? Are we head of the pack? Are we still a laggard? Are we doing it very differently? Are we aligned in how we're doing this?
I think we're pretty much all in the same place.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have got a new management plan in front of us to 2050 or 2040, hopefully. But it also informs all our policies and all our work programmes going forwards as well. I'd like to think the Peak District kind of is in the lead, is in the box seat. But in truth, all the national parks are doing great work. The Lake District historically has been ahead of the pack. But I think our new management plan brings us up now to the speed that maybe the Lake District is at. But other national parks, the Lakes is one, South Downs is another, are possibly looking in some areas, visitor transport in particular, in more detail. And we can all learn, and we are all learning from each other. Climate change is still one of the 4 key delivery aims of National Parks England. And it is squarely up there with nature recovery, and the government very much is playing that back to us. So I think everything we read here is very positive about where we're positioned. And whilst I've got the floor, as it were, I'd like to commend all the members of the Climate Change Steering Group here in the Peak District for your work with officers over the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years. It's been instrumental, and it's exactly what members should be doing, focusing in on the key areas, working with officers and other stakeholders to improve what we're doing, to make sure there's good practice, and to show ambition, to keeping this authority, holding it to account, and showing leadership. And that's really what it's about at the end of the day, because I've played this back to government ministers time and again, how national parks are so well positioned to show climate leadership on a national scale, because this is what we're set up to do: landscape first, natural resources and the environment, as well as our huge visitor footfall. We're in a position as national parks, not just this one, to kind of influence the behaviour, the lifestyles of so many people in terms of sustainability, what a low carbon economy looks like, lifestyles. So this is exactly where we're at, and I think we're in a good place. We could always do more, but the fact that our new management plan again has climate change there throughout, the golden thread that Andrea referred to, I think is really positive. We've just got to get on and deliver now, but the steering group has, I think, done its job and deserves a lot of praise.
Thank you, Andrew. James.
Chair, this is a question perhaps for you and the Vice Chair of this committee. I am battle weary from the management plan, but what I would say is how well the working group operated in tandem with the development of the management plan, and one of the most successful aspects of the management plan is indeed this. So, you know, I commend the working group's approach to that. What I would ask, though, is how you anticipate this being progress against this being reported. I completely support the idea that P&R should take the themes from the management plan. I understand that. And you can't take a theme every time P&R meets, or you can't take each theme every P&R meets. But how do you anticipate it being reported on the progress of the objectives? Do you see that being through the management plan appraisal process as we go through it, or does it come back to this committee, or does it do both?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, at this stage, I'll hand over to Andrea in a moment, but at this stage, because the management plan isn't even live, in this annual cycle, we'll be presenting the 4 different aims in terms of a framework for their scope and what's going to be in them. But yes, going forward, it's how do we report against that? And I think Emily, if she were here, would be able to give you a more fulsome answer to what will be coming to P&R. But Andrea, if you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, so in relation to our authority plan moving forward, we would report as we do now on a 6-monthly basis. And so in relation to the specific objective around climate change, then that, along with the other 4 themes, will be reported on a 6-monthly basis against those targets. And that report will come back, and I think that we're in that stage at the moment where we're going to be developing what that looks like moving forward. And so you would get that normally, I think it's the September, isn't it, to the authority meeting. So I see that one element of where we would be reporting back specifically in relation to that. And then obviously the National Park Management Plan, there are discussions afoot. I don't want to kind of like second guess those, but obviously there's talk about how that is going to be monitored and how that is going to be reported back to members, and that's all part of those discussions that are ongoing at the moment about the replacement of the advisory group and how that's going to go forward. So I think in relation to programmes and resources and the current themes and programme that has been appointed to it by the authority, that will roll its course up until the July meeting, but the actual reporting back of the specific authority plan will be to the authority meeting in September.
So, just to, before James, you come back in, I think as you're aware, being on the management plan task and finish group as well, this is an area that is still evolving. But my understanding is that programmes and resources are here to discuss and do a sort of deep dive understanding of the context of what's coming forward for each of those programmes area, which there isn't time to do at authority level, where we'd be looking at reporting, seeing reports against KPIs and particular indicators, whereas this gives members a greater opportunity to contextualise and scrutinise those 4 aims in a bit more detail.
Well, I think that's my point, actually. The monitoring of the crunching of the progress does go to authority, of course it does.
Yes.
But, you know, what this committee provides the opportunity to do is get under the skin of some of these things that we couldn't possibly do now.
Yeah.
You know, the disbanding of the climate change working group, I understand fully, but it negates a level of involvement from members in this very important process. So I think all I'm saying to you, Chair and Vice Chair, is that This committee is an incredibly useful tool to allow us to do exactly what you said. And, you know, I hope that that becomes part of the regular programme. I mean, looking at all those objectives, you can say, yes, we're doing well on one or the other, but you might want to deep dive into a couple of them and how we're responding and how it's being effective. And I just think that this particular committee is perfectly set to do that. So it's in your mind, so I welcome that and thank you for that.
Thank you, James. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the Climate Change Steering Group was very successful, but I would think that because I was on it. And it did allow great scrutiny at a time when it was needed. It was a relatively new area for the authority and the management plan to get up to speed with. But yeah, do we want a steering group sitting behind each aim for the management plan, then reporting to P&R? It becomes cumbersome. But I don't think it means either that the only time we look at each of these aims and what's going in them is when this committee comes together. I think there's potential for member engagement, involvement and scrutiny before it gets here, and that's where I personally would see the member champions being involved in those areas, whether it's nature recovery or climate change or access or sustainable community. I think there's opportunities for member engagement before it comes to P&R, but P&R does give an opportunity to learn, understand and engage with these programmes in more detail. Okay, thank you. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Janet. To some extent, this is picking up on Andrew's points about National Park and just the whole debate around climate change. I mean, I think, you know, I'll just echo what everyone else has said. I mean, I can't take any credit at all for the Climate Change Steering Committee.
No, you can't.
Because I think I only attended one meeting and then had to leave early. But I think my point is, Janet, it's massively important, as we all know. And I do think there is now an absolute massive public concern. I mean, I'm down in Herefordshire at the weekend, stood on the bridge, looking at a swollen river and the flooded fields around, and a local saying to me, you know, towns are flooded, we'll be fighting over food in the next few years, you know, this thing is just horrendous. What are the government doing? What are people doing about this? And I think there is just this real now massive audience that welcomes this stuff, really wants to hear about it, wants to hear what we're doing about it. So my point is, this is all great, but sitting around here, and if I was listening in on the audio, I'll be thinking, well, it's great all this, but it all sounds a bit internal. All sounds a bit as if, isn't it great, all these people working together on this? What's happening out there in the world? What's actually going to happen now in relation to all this work that's been done? And so, and you know, where are we on the website? What are we doing about getting some of this stuff out there into the public? And so that's not a critical point, but it's a kind of, what are we doing to get on now to actually engage with the public, to make certain the public are with us on all of this?
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's quite an existential set of questions and comments you've made there. But I mean, because there's a recommendation for the Climate Change Steering Group to disband, it doesn't mean the work's finished. What it means is that the member engagement in getting climate change front and centre of strategies, policies, and thinking of the authority and its partners in the management plan, that part of it's done. Obviously, there's a whole range of objectives to be met, and the scrutiny will be in whether the partners and the authority are able to meet those objectives over time. And I don't imagine for one moment member scrutiny will have stopped on those, but this has set the framework and the prioritisation for that. But you're absolutely right. It's these are fundamental questions, and I don't know where climate change is on the website. It's got its own page. Okay, it's got its own page, so it is there. But yes, but this is starting to put it at the start of the conversation, not at the end of the conversation. But absolutely, it's now about action. But this has provided the framework for that action. Charlotte Farrell.
Thanks. Sort of going a bit to what Andrew's just said, I'd like to see us be so much more vocal about on social media, etc., about climate change. And to that end, I think we really do need to start talking about moorland burning, which I see all around me in Hope Valley, and we just let it carry on. And I think we need to talk about that and the impact. And also in relation to, we talk about nature recovery, but I think that's a really weak term. We need to be talking about biodiversity and the biodiversity crisis. Insects. Whoever sees battered windscreens now, that doesn't happen. I just think we need to be a lot more vocal about all these things, and the impact of some of the things that go on in the Peak District, which we sort of turn a blind eye to. That's it.
Thank you. Phil's going to respond to that,
Oh,
because he's not said anything yet today.
I want to thank Andrea for an amazing presentation at short notice on the report. Well done, really good. Charlotte, really, you ask a really important question that has got quite a difficult answer. Our personal beliefs and opinions are one thing, but this is an authority that has stakeholders and certain responsibilities and is constrained to some extent in how vocal it can be on certain issues, because our role, if anything, is about convening, and that's around bringing people with us and being inclusive and having conversations and promoting debate. If we become very vocal on an opinion where other people will have an opposite opinion, it risks some of what we can achieve. So, my personal views aside, I think we do have to be, quite careful in what we say. Personally, it pains me to say that, but that's the job I've taken on, and that's the responsibility I have in running the authority. Where I think we can do a lot is in restoration work. And I think nature recovery is quite a nice term, because I think it's something that people can relate to. I think biodiversity feels a bit technical to a lot of people. I think talking about a crisis is fine. I am happy to talk about a climate crisis and a biodiversity or a nature crisis, because there is a crisis. It's what our role is in addressing that, which we have to be careful on, really. So the moorland burning is, it's a really tricky one, and there are other ones as well, and there's just difference of opinion. So I don't have a problem with nature recovery. I think we could debate it a long time. I'm happy to talk about crisis. I'm happy for us to be more vocal. I don't think our website is a great place to do much on. It's got a very unengaging institutional feel to it. It's not where the debates on climate and nature really are going to happen. Social media, I just think, Charlotte, I just have to, I respect your opinions and beliefs, and I think I have to just respect the role of the authority in this.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Andrew McCloy.
Just very briefly, just to pick up on Phil said, and Andrew as well. Phil knows my views on the fact the website needs to be improved and overhauled, but also our whole public affairs and PR on these key issues. We need to look again and inject some dynamism and kind of strategic direction as well. And there is a page on the website, in fact, quite a lot of detail on the website about climate change, and it's good, and it's reasonably up to date. I tweeted yesterday about our climate change vulnerability assessment, and the fact that it is groundbreaking. That's the kind of thing we should have been shouting about much louder. So there's work to do there, but Phil knows that, and that's going to be in hand. But I agree with you in terms of one of our roles here is not just doing stuff, but encouraging others to do stuff, convening, to cheerleading, influencing, and to do that we need to be smarter at what we say and how we say it. But Phil, you're on the case on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew Gregory again.
Well, just to come back, Janet, and say that, in fairness to all concerned, delving down into the website, you can find the stuff.
Yeah.
It's there. But I think my point is, and it's Andrew's point really, let's get it to a point where people can effectively engage with it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. While you're on, Andrew Gregory, would you be willing to move these recommendations for us? Thank you. Seconder, Lydia Slack, please. I think that's been a useful discussion. I'm aware of time's ticking on. It's a sort of fundamental part of what we do, but can we move to the more prosaic and these two recommendations? One is to note the climate change report and the plans for its role within the management plan, but also the authority strategy. And the second is to recommend to the authority that the climate change steering group has done its work to date and will not be recruited to in July. So could we have a show of hands on this, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you again to all the officers who have been involved in the climate change work over the last year or two on this, but also all the members of the steering group who've contributed a lot of time to crunching numbers and understanding technicalities behind the scenes. So thank you very much. And thank you, Andrea, again for your report. Can we go to another decision item now? Have I done something wrong, Charles? No. Decision item, which is item 9, which is the carbon management progress report. Matt Freestone, please.
Thank you. Yes, this is our annual report on our operational carbon emissions and progress against our carbon management plan targets. It's later than we normally bring it. We normally come to, I think, normally around July PNR meeting, but this covers the 21-22 financial year. Part of the reason we delayed bringing it to this committee was to do it at the same time as the report you've just discussed. And you know, I'm quite glad we did that, because that sets, you know, what we do internally in the context. You know, I was glad Andrea, you know, highlighted, you know, the issues around the built environment, travel, you know, sequestering carbon and how that relates to nature recovery and our land. And I think what we do internally is a good example of that, and it's very much practicing what we preach. And you know, that's what this report is about, really, is progress against that. So just quickly to go through the report, it's the standard progress report you've seen in previous years, and for the first time this year we've got data around our land-based emissions, which I'll cover shortly. I think the first and most important point to recognise is to highlight the 56% reduction in carbon emissions against our baseline that we've achieved. However, still to recognise that we've got over 400 tonnes of carbon from our operations still to eliminate if we're going to hit our net zero target. So the way we report on emissions, I'll just quickly give you a bit of background, is split into scope 1, 2 and 3. Scope 1 are direct emissions. So that's emissions from fuel used in vehicles, that's emissions from, you know, gas burnt in boilers, you know, and so on and so forth. Scope 2 are what are called energy indirect emissions, and that's essentially the emissions associated with electricity use. And then scope 3 are the indirect emissions. And you know, there's quite a lot in terms of the best practice on reporting, and quite a lot of leeway in terms of what we include in scope 3 and what we don't. We choose to include those things where we have good data and that we can have a direct influence over. So we include things like, you know, private vehicle use for business travel, waste, water, and what they call well-to-tank emissions, which is the generation-related emissions. So just very quickly to go through each of the scopes. Scope 1, we made a lot of progress in, but it's becoming quite flat now in terms of further achievements. And I think to make any further significant improvements there, we need to look at our fleet vehicles, which I think will come in time as we move across to electric vehicles more and more. And also to look at our you know, built assets, and particularly our tenanted properties, which again we're getting through as we do refurbs of our tenanted properties. We always move them to renewable heating systems when we have the opportunity. Scope 2, I think the most important thing to note is that we don't have any Scope 2 emissions for our operational properties. We've eliminated those totally by going over to a 100% renewable electricity supply. So we now just have within Scope 2 some relatively small emissions from tenanted properties. And Scope 3, I think the greatest contributor to the Scope 3 emissions is travelling private cars on business travel. They've proved quite stubborn to reduce any further, but again, as vehicles become more efficient and individuals move to more electric vehicles, they will improve. And I think we've also seen some reductions there due to COVID and probably due to fuel price increases, meaning people are more likely to use our pool cars, which are lower emission than your average vehicle. So just moving on to, like I say, the first time we've reported this year on our emissions from land. We've commissioned EQM, the Environmental Quality Mark, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with, to gather the data associated with our land and enter it into the authority's carbon footprint, land-based carbon footprint tool that Sue Fletcher developed with ADAS a couple of years ago. And that's quite a unique tool in that there's a lot of carbon footprinting tools for land around. None of them have the kind of the detail in there to be able to account for conservation practices in particular. And that's something that we'll improve on as we go forward with that tool. So I think it's worth pointing out in terms of the land-based emissions that the emissions don't include the estates we've got on long-term leases, i.e. Eastern Moors and the Roaches, because we consider them to be not under our direct management. But it does include tenanted farms on Warslow and North Lees, and also obviously the trails, car parks, woodlands, all the other land we directly manage. So the outcome of that shows overall emissions from our land of just over 2,000 tonnes, which is obviously significant. I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind with that. Firstly, that particularly some of the data that we gather, particularly around grasslands, which is predominantly, particularly what Warslow comes under, we don't have the nuance of being able to differentiate between conservation managed grasslands and more intensively managed grasslands. There's just not the data available nationally. There has been some work on it, but we don't have the robust data to include in that tool to make those calculations. So while we've got this figure here, it's I think Faith from EQM said to me, it's not the truth. It's a indication of how we're performing, and it probably will change as better information becomes available. I think it's also worth pointing out that a lot of the emissions, particularly on Warslow, are associated with food production. And while the emissions look high, if we were to do have a look at how much food or number of kilograms of food produced per tonne of carbon released, the carbon emissions would actually be relatively low per kilogram compared to more intensively farmed areas. So we have to kind of offset, look at this in the context that the farms on Warslow are producing food, which is an important thing to do. And some may notice that there is quite a contrast between Warslow and North Lees, which is quite stark in the data. And that's essentially because North Lees estate is basically an area of moorland with a very low number of animals on there, low number of sheep. And while it is farmed, it's primarily managed for conservation. That's rather than farming being the main focus. In effect, conservation is the main focus. Whereas Warslow has a much greater productivity, greater number of animals, but obviously there's still conservation focused on most of the farms there. So in terms of the land emissions, we are awaiting the final report from EQM, and my intention was to bring that to the Climate Change Steering Group. Whether we get that in time or not, well, I don't know, but you know, hopefully you'll have sight of that in some form anyway. I think it'll be quite an interesting read. Sorry, I went on for a while then, but thank you.
Matt, thank you very much. And it's really encouraging to see land management in there, but also the great levels of reduction in scope 2 in particular. Open to questions and comments from members. Pete Tapping.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of sort of very large questions, I suppose. Page 54 on the chart there. We say the woodland storing 115,000 tonnes, and this question I brought up before. So you'll have heard this before, Matt. Do we have anything, or we got any plans to work out what we're going to do to lock that in long term? Because when the trees die or when they get chopped down, if they're burnt or they rot away, the carbon goes back into the atmosphere. Yeah. So it's all right where everybody's planting trees, but in 50, 60 years' time, we've left the people that are looking after it then with a huge problem unless we come up with a solution. Now, I know we're not going to get it today and nobody's got any ideas, but shouldn't we be putting something in place to investigate how on earth we're going to lock all that carbon in the long-term future?
I'm not sure I can fully answer that. I mean, I think, you know, when we have, you know, removed trees, for instance, at Stanage with the plant health notice works we did recently, you know, it is sold as biomass fuel, which offsets, you know, emissions from other fuel uses. You know, at some point or other, the carbon, you know, because of the nature of timber, the carbon emissions within that timber will be released.
Yeah.
And I think the best we can do is make sure that release is stopping other.
At the moment, I'm not expecting you to come up with an answer, Matt. I'm just putting it out there that I think this is something that everybody's involved in this sort of thing, or we all ought to be pushing forward. An international level rather than, you know, just us, is if we're locking it in, how are we going to keep it locked in longer term? So, and I'm not expecting you to answer that at all. I just want to put it on the standard. And the other question is on page 55, Moorland and peat. Previous versions show Moorland and peat as sequestering, and now we say it isn't. So have we been wasting our time restoring the peat moors?
No.
No.
Well, is somebody going to, I mean, what we're doing is preventing the loss of carbon from peat moorlands. But if we're restoring them all, we're not now storing more carbon until it says they're mature. When do they become mature, and when do we get a positive feel from that rather than the neutral feel we seem to be getting now?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not my particular area of great expertise, but I think, you know, the work we're doing on the moorland, if that work wasn't done, the emissions would be much, much higher than what we are. You know, we're kind of keeping them at a level, and it may still be slightly emitting, but it's nothing like it would be if we weren't doing that work.
Yeah. Andrew McCloy, you're going to add a little bit
I need
to
to
that.
say, Pete, because if David Chapman was here, he'd be hopping up and down. It's bringing the moorlands back, that long, slow, difficult journey to healthy condition again, which is not an overnight fix. They will continue to emit because they're so degraded. But the journey is moving back, and it just takes years, decades to bring back healthy moorlands, sphagnum moss operating properly. But the reverse is starting to happen. It's just going to take a long time to get I won't say the oil tanker moving, but you know what I mean, moving around. So the trajectory, the trend is in the right direction there, but until we get to further down the line, they will carry on emitting. Sorry, I've got a couple of other points as well.
Thanks, Pete. Sorry, I thought you had two questions.
Sorry, can I come in another one?
Okay.
There was just something that Matt said there about not including the Eastern Moors and the things we don't own, we can't control, we don't directly control. Do we have an overall picture, including all the things in the big district, including all the stuff, all these masses of land that we don't control? I know we can't live without it, but do we have a picture and view that we can put forward and possibly leverage some advance in those areas?
Yes, I mean, as I understand it, that relates to the previous item, and one of the studies from Small World Consulting is currently working that out.
Okay, thank you. Phil wanted to add a bit more about moorlands, and then I'll come to you,
Yep.
Andrew, and then I've got Jill.
And I know your tongue was in your cheek, Pete, with what you said, but it's worth remembering that we don't just restore the moorlands to stop them emitting carbon.
Yeah.
It's also about flood prevention. It's also about the water quality that comes off, and it's also about biodiversity and nature, because these are very degraded habitats and they're very rare habitats as well. So there's lots of good reasons why we do that, and of course we do that restoration not just on the moorlands that we own, but through Moors for the Future. We're generating income to then restore moorlands across the park and actually beyond as well.
Thank you. Andrew, you next.
Matt, your very opening paragraph, paragraph 1, you mentioned the authority's goal of becoming zero carbon by 2050. Of course, national parks are signed up to be zero carbon before then, with a goal of 2040, 2045, if possible. So that's our legal obligation as a public authority. We want to get there before, and we're trying to commit to get there before. There's a lot of positive here, especially where we were from baseline, and I really welcome the new look at land, because that is so essential and so important for us. And it's clear from what you say and from your report that the data needs to be smarter, so we understand what's going on and what the true picture is. And I really appreciate your focus on the Walslow Moors and the fact that, and I'm going to preempt what Jill might be saying here, that we need to take into account land managers and farmers producing food and find a way to factor that into the data so that it reflects back that it's not all negative, that there's a positive outcome here. It's going to require us to be smarter with our data, and I've talked to Faith about this as well, because I think the picture is probably very different to as it's presented here, but this is a really positive first step. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Jill Heath.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, you said it more or less, but it's just that the Walslow estate is drawn up as having the highest carbon. Farmers are doing a lot for the environment. We're not all thick and, don't care less. My own son has planted loads of hedges and he's put trees in and little bits of land that he's got here and there. And they are conscious of this, and they're doing a lot more than they did. The Walslow estate has got more animal stock farming, hasn't it? So that's why, obviously, it can't get down as low as some of them. But just in their defence, they are aware of this, they do this, and I think it's a bit unfair to see them flagged up as much higher, because this is only a small island. We get more and more people living on this island. We want food. I mean, in the Farmer's Guardian this morning, I had a quick look. They're saying about the dairy produce has gone up, but it's the way of the world, isn't it? The basics, the farmers provide the basics that we all need. So just a word in defence.
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. Matt, do you want to respond to that? What I would just say before Matt responds is that this is a data-led report, and it's reporting carbon emissions. I think what you're talking about is the context for that, which is perfectly a reasonable point to make, and maybe in the narrative we can think about that in future. Sorry, Matt, I don't know what you were going to say.
Well, I think, again, possibly in defence of the farmers on Walslow, a lot of the emissions we see here are from the farms where we have legacy tenancies, some of which were from before Chris started managing it in the 80s. any new tenancies, and certainly any tenancies over the last 30 years or so, have had a more of a conservation focus, which, you know, and I think when we get down to the detail in the report from EQM, we'll see that nuance a little bit more strongly.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I'm on the panel at the County Council for Setting Farms, and we have a 10-year first tenancy, and then a 16-year progression tenancy. I mean, they can move on before 10 years if they're suitable, but it does stop this. The Worslow's good because it gets progression, doesn't it? Farmers' sons can take over. But, yeah, the younger ones you'll find are more susceptible to climate change and more willing to change, so it will get better, won't it? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So time's ticking on. Can I ask for to recommend Charles to second? Can we, everyone who's in favour of receiving this data and report? Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Now, I've had a request for us to have a mini break. We do have 2 more items, one of which is a reasonably substantial Part B item. Would you like a mini break before we do that? Okay, can we come back in 5 minutes, please? Thank you.
draw now that's red.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, if we could resume, please. Thank you for coming back so promptly. We're now on item 10 for information, the annual report of the due diligence panel. And I'm going to ask Andrea McCaskey to introduce this briefly, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report of the due diligence panel, and the panel is made up of Mr Beresford, who represents the members on the panel, myself, Justine Wells and Sarah Wilkes, Head of Engagement. And the role of the panel is to look at proposals moving forward and developing relationships where there's a financial value of more than £5,000. It's been a busier year this year than it has in previous years for the panel, and they've sat and they've considered 3 proposals and approved those proposals moving forward with 3 different organisations that have wanted to form relationships with the authority, and all 3 of them have been around Moors for the Future partnership. The panel actually considered the 3 proposals which have been set out in paragraph 9 for you, and it's really exciting work that's happening in relation to those areas, because we're hoping that these relationships will be developed moving forward, and that we will be able to work in partnership with them and actually see a transfer of skills and experience between ourselves and these organisations, some of which work in similar fields to ourselves, and in particular whether or not there's some joint learning that can continue with that. So the 3 applications that were considered and were approved was a grant to the Worley Foundation, and they are actually the pro bono arm of an Australian company that provide project and asset services in energy, chemicals and the resources sector. A donation straight to Moors for the Future without any conditions attached to it from the Golden Bottle Trust, and also a donation from Intelligent Facility Solutions via 1% for the Planet. So as I said, they're really exciting proposals, and I know that the Moors for the Future team are very keen to look at building on these going forward to see what benefits and collaboration can be moved forward for the organisation. And a lot of these organisations work by word of mouth as well, so we're hoping that we will be able to build on that work going forward. So the panel also consider in-kind and benefit registers on a 6-monthly basis, and I think over and above that our work continues. We have a member deputy in Annabelle Harling as well, and the panel sits on a quarterly basis if it's needed and required, but obviously it can sit more frequently if necessary. So in front of you the recommendations are just to note what the panel's been doing over the last 12 months. I'm happy to answer any questions, but James is also here, so may wish to add to that brief presentation of the annual report.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll be brief. I know time is pressing, so I'll keep my comments about 45 minutes.
Don't you dare.
Just to assure members, actually, this is a very robust process. And it's exactly the sort of things that we should be doing in considering our good governance. So I commend this process to you, and I would urge you to support the proposals.
Thank you, James. Any comments or questions from anybody? Okay, I think it's a noting for information. I think it's a very clear report, great work, and good news we're getting these funds in for Moors for the Future. So can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? James, and a seconder, Pete Tapping. Thank you very much. All in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We're now are moving into exempt information territory. So we have a resolution in front of us to move to Part B. Thank you, Andrew, for starting that, and Charles is seconding it. So can we have a show of hands to move to Part B, please? Thank you. Is that everybody? Thank you very much.